ADHD Rewired, episode 440. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free and secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups. Learn all about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. You can co-work with us in our Adult Study Hall virtual membership community. You can do all of these things by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Kimberly McColl. Kimberly is a recovering academic living in Nashville, where she was diagnosed with ADHD in February of 2021. She also has bipolar 2. Her recent diagnosis has caused her to rethink the narrative she has told herself her entire life. Currently, she is learning more about ADHD and trying to give herself some more grace and forgiveness. Kimberly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Just so listeners can maybe get a visual idea. So we tried to do this last week, right? And there was some audio issues. And she's in Nashville, and she's in like the coolest looking studio right now. It's like my dream space right there. So it is great to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you. And as I mentioned earlier, in Nashville, it's Music City, so there's basically a studio on every corner. Not a bad place to be. Are you a musician at all? I'm not. I'm probably one of a handful of people who aren't.
So out there, when you're not a musician, you're the outlier, huh?
Well, you need people to come to your shows.
That's true. All right, so I want to actually start with part of your bio where you say you're a recovering academic.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So I'm going to start a little bit before that. My parents kind of knew how to raise an academic. So when I was very, very small, bedtime stories were actual novels. So Watership Down, which is not appropriate for children, but also The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. My father was really into that stuff. And so I remember listening to those books. And then just throughout growing up, being really able to kind of hyper-focus on reading. It was an escape for me. And then did the whole college thing, decided to go into a graduate program. Some of that was amazing, and some of it was really torturous. So I ended up getting a PhD in English from Vanderbilt.
So you got a PhD undiagnosed with ADHD? Yes. Wow. How did that go?
Well, I used a number of different strategies for being able to get through that. I learned pretty quickly that you cannot read everything that they assign in full.
I missed that lesson in grad school because I did, and I never understood how these some of the people in my cohort also were like parents and had full-time jobs in addition to being full-time grad students having an internship. Like it didn't make sense to me. Like the math didn't seem to add up because I was getting like 2 hours of sleep a night in grad school. And I didn't know until the very end that, you're supposed to like prioritize what you read. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it would have been impossible for me to actually read everything because, you have 3 seminars during your coursework, 3 seminars a semester, and that's 3 hours each. So lots and lots of classroom time. And in the English department, for each class, you're typically assigned a novel and then several essays that are secondary sources. So over the course of, say, a week, we're talking about more than 1,000 pages to read. That's just not my life.
Yeah. So are you out of academics now?
I am. I did eventually finish my doctorate and passed my defense. I worked as a lecturer for a little bit. And that was in addition to some of the teaching that I'd done during, my grad school experience. And I discovered that it was very difficult to manage time in the classroom. I would have to basically practice my lectures so that, I could time everything and also so that I could get a sense of, where I would veer off subject.
Okay. Wow. That sounded like that would require a lot of time to really prepare and to show up for that job.
Definitely.
So at that point, when did you receive the diagnosis? So you were diagnosed with bipolar 2, which is the way I've always remembered that is 2 is blue. So it's the sadder version of bipolar. So less
Yes.
mania, more the depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so when were you diagnosed with that?
So that was in 2008. I was towards the end, actually, of getting my degree. The diagnosis was very difficult for me to accept because I knew that the ups and downs that I experienced, the very, very low lows and the highs, would be something that I would have to cycle through for the rest of my life. And of course, I take medication, I do therapy, and all of that is very supportive, but you can't cure it. And then diagnosed with ADHD, as you mentioned, a year ago in February.
So what brought you to that?
I had to change psychiatrists because my old psychiatrist was retiring. And she was helping me manage the the bipolar disorder with medication. With the new psychiatrist, I showed up when I thought I was on time, like exactly on time. Like that rarely happens for me, but I was like, I'm going to be there. But I showed up exactly a day early.
I had a feeling that's where this was going to go.
Yes. And so he did an intake call with me for about an hour. And then the next time we talked, he was like, let's get you evaluated. Luckily, that was not a long process for me. I know sometimes people go through a whole battery of tests and have to, get evidence from school and things like that.
And how was ADHD showing up for you?
So it was always difficult for me to to keep track of time. I have a really big problem with time blindness. I thought that if you're reading, I thought that it was a normal thing for people to just kind of lose track of time and to become really absorbed. The novel, for example, then learning that that is not a typical experience was really interesting, caused me to kind of think about things a little more deeply. I also was having trouble with losing things or doing things that were not interesting to me. I had trouble writing my dissertation because it's such a long-term project. It took me 2 years. You can't just, wait until the night before. And then, of course, just kind of like thinking back through time. I remember like one of my first memories is going to this, what seemed like a huge store with my mother to try to pick out things for preschool. I must have been maybe 3 or 4 and having that sensory overwhelm and then also getting in trouble in preschool for not napping because I was too busy daydreaming. So that was something that school was definitely difficult. I didn't have any accommodations, but it was a small town. And so once everybody kind of got the sense, like my teachers got the sense that I really was listening, even though I was drawing, then that became, I guess, not quite as difficult. So it really was, even though I wasn't having accommodations, it really was the ability for my teachers to be flexible and understanding that I actually am listening. And that's how I can listen is by drawing.
Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of self-awareness that has been developed over the years. So living with ADHD and bipolar disorder, there's often misdiagnosis, especially in women who get diagnosed with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, when it may be it's not that, it's ADHD, and sometimes it's that and ADHD. Everyone's experience of any mental health related issue is going to be unique to that because of the way sort of mental health diagnoses work. It's you have a handful of different criteria, and you don't have to meet all of them. You have to meet a certain number of them, which means there's going to be variation. How does ADHD and bipolar disorder show up for you?
So this is something that I think that a lot of people think about when they're getting diagnosed. For me, I guess the thing that was most important to get, more stable was the bipolar disorder. I'm 46 now. And so it took quite a long time for someone to even see that this was an additional thing that I was struggling with. And because, as I mentioned, I thought that it was moral failing and felt shame around it, it wasn't something that I spoke with to the psychiatrist that I was seeing. Now it's really clear to me. Some people get the diagnosis of bipolar disorder when it's really about the fluctuating emotional regulation that people experience in ADHD. In my case, the differences are very clear. So I do have a mood cycle that will last, between 10 days to 6 months, where I may be very, very depressed or hypomanic. So, not having any psychosis with it, like you would if you were bipolar 1, but definitely feeling some pretty extreme symptoms of mania.
I just wanted to pause to just define a couple words because, yes. I know that not all of our listeners know all the psychobabble terms that we were just using. So you mentioned bipolar 1. So bipolar 2 is blue, bipolar 1 is fun. Mm-hmm. Not that it's fun, but it can be experienced during a manic episode. It's high energy. It's the sleep differences and disturbances, where the person who's in a manic episode generally actually doesn't need much sleep versus the person with ADHD who often thinks they can go without sleep.
Right. So during a manic episode, for me, I wouldn't feel like I needed any sleep. At the beginning of it, I was looking at like, oh, I feel amazing. My life is turning around. And then delusions of grandeur. So I had my first manic episode when I was around 16, and I decided that I was going to open a bakery. So I went to the library and checked out this cookbook, and it turned out to be an industrial cookbook. So I made roughly 200 croissants over the course of 3 days. Parents were not thrilled about that. And you would think that had they been paying attention, they might have thought, oh, yeah, our daughter is struggling through some things. But I think because of sometimes the way in which mania is perceived by other people, it kind of went under their radar. I think
how do you feel it's perceived by other people?
Well, it really depends. So I've warned my friends that if I'm talking really quickly, I have all these big plans, like I'm going to open up a furniture store. I have to make
that also sells croissants.
I'm sorry?
A furniture store that also sells croissants.
Yes. It's the best idea ever. I think for some people, they perceive it as a sense of, okay, she's talking really quickly and maybe a little difficult to follow, but some of these ideas are totally suspect. And then as it progresses, things get steadily less comfortable. So feeling an internal agitation is not a comfortable feeling out of control. So like making very risky decisions, like spending every cent of money that I have, or making very risky, like driving decisions or decisions about sex. That's something that people experience with mania, including myself. That's one of the, I think, warnings. Am I making good decisions?
So I'm really curious to sort of know how someone with both ADHD and bipolar disorder can differentiate sort of just these dopamine-seeking activities versus something being more of a manic or hypomanic episode. So I would love for you to share with us what that kind of looks like and how you determine the differences between those two things. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you to share how you do that. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our award-winning coaching and accountability groups. Right now, we are in the middle of registration for our fall coaching groups. So if you want to go from listening to ADHD Rewired to getting your ADHD Rewired, then go to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our fall interest list. The earlier you register, the more you can save. Sign up at this week's early registration event on Thursday, August 4th, and you can save up to $300 off your enrollment. If you want to learn how to better manage your time, have your calendar reflect your priorities while setting healthy boundaries, if you want to improve your self-talk and build your own ADHD toolbox full of bright, shiny tools that work for the uniqueness of your ADHD brain, then this is the group you've been looking for. And you won't have to learn any of this alone.
This group is like a scaffolding for us to move from intention to action. And the scaffolding's above the muck and the stories and everything else. If you have a scaffolding in a building, you're renovating it. You could be renovating or renewing it. And that building is us. For me, the building project is trying to open the windows, increase the size of the windows. And when the size of the windows increase, more light gets in. And just as importantly, more of our light gets out.
This is what it feels like to join this group. In a world of many kinds of boats, I have tried to be on a crew with specific skills that were never useful. I would try to help, but either slow down the boat, add loads of work for myself or someone else. And then I joined this group and finally on a boat like I was meant to be. We are in sync. We understand so much of the mechanics of this ADHD boat.
This group of strangers, we got together and we came into this thing thinking we were our own special kind of broken. But we grew together, uplifted each other, and saw how we're not broken and we're not alone. And we built this beautiful community of support. I saw this group and I knew this was my place.
I think that group is not about finding the support or the techniques to grind through the tasks and the difficulties that you've had in life, but it's giving you the push to relax into it, to be gentle with yourself, experiment, tweak, laugh, cry, and just like accept and be more open.
If you're thinking about joining this group, I've never liked the idea for myself of any kind of group coaching or therapy or support groups. I've always figured my difficulties were so severe that I needed the full attention of an individual coach or therapist, which I've done, and that I would not be able to get enough out of a group. However, group coaching through ARC has been more beneficial than I possibly could have imagined. It's been amazing being surrounded by people, including the coach, who all have ADHD.
There is still time to take advantage of our early registration incentive. You can still save up to $300 when you join us this Thursday, August 4th. Can't make it or still on the fence? You could still save $200 on August 11th and $100 if you join us August 18th. Then, on or after August 25th, admission will be full price. So the sooner you register, the more you'll save. Members have already saved on the cost of our coaching groups by joining us early and registering for Kat or Kristen's groups. So don't wait. Go to coachingrewired.com to start your pre-registration process and find all the times being offered for our fall season. Deadline for all pre-registration submissions is at 11:59 p.m. the day before our registration events. Sure, we offer tools and ways to help better manage ADHD, but it's much more than just about the tools we have. It's also about getting curious, learning to ask for what we need, being resilient, and having a community of like-wired brains to help us and cheer us on along the way. Time and time again, the members of our groups prove that we really can do hard things, and you can too. Get added to our fall interest list and take advantage of saving $300 when you join selected sections of our upcoming coaching groups by coming to our registration event this week on Thursday, August 4th at coachingrewired.com. Come grow with us. That's coachingrewired.com. If you are new to ADHD Rewired, welcome. Did you know that ADHD Rewired is not alone? We have more podcasts on the ADHD Rewired podcast network that you can check out and subscribe to, including ADHD Essentials with Brenda Mahan, Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb, and ADHD Diversified with MJ Siemens. Find ADHD Rewired and all of our shows by going to ADHDrewired.com/podcast network and subscribe to this show so you can stay up to date with our new episodes that come out every week. Also, you could join me and the rest of the ADHD Rewired podcast family and ADHD Rewired coaches once a month for our monthly live Q&A. Our next monthly live Q&A is next week on Tuesday, August 9th. That's my dad and sister's birthday. Happy birthday, Dad and Pam. So go to ADHDrewired.com/events to register and join us on Zoom so you can interact with the panelists and other listeners live and ask your ADHD related questions. Get more from ADHD Rewired and find this podcast and all of our shows by going to ADHDrewired.com. And don't forget, you can join us next week for our monthly live Q&A on August 9th by going to ADHDrewired.com/events. Find everything ADHD Rewired at ADHDrewired.com. All right, we are back with Kimberly McCall. All right, so Kimberly, right before the break, I was asking you about how does someone who either does have both bipolar disorder and ADHD, or they're wondering if could it also be bipolar disorder? So let's start there. So I have a follow up to that. But how do you distinguish the difference between the manic episodes and just kind of seeking the dopamine that we often do with ADHD?
That is a great question. And I think it's one that I definitely struggle with. I would say that if you are wondering that you maybe have bipolar disorder, you should definitely get an assessment. It's a really common comorbidity, so it happens a lot. One of the things that I think that psychiatry is getting better at is determining, okay, this person has ADHD, we should test for these other common comorbidities and vice versa. Bipolar and ADHD is actually very common. So is ADHD and autism. So really being able to kind of say, okay, to your support team, like I need to, think about these other things as well. The distinction for me between manic episodes and the hyperfocus and dopamine-seeking of ADHD is a difference of extremes, right? If I'm trying to work and I don't want to, and I'd rather play this video game, like the boring thing that I have to do does feel torturous. Like it's very, very, it's painful. And playing video games is much more rewarding. That is something that is not as long, right? So the duration isn't there. Also, I think that there's a distinction between the racing thoughts of ADHD versus the racing thoughts of bipolar disorder.
Can you sort of paint that picture for us? Because that I'm really interested to. I mean, I definitely understand the racing thoughts of ADHD because I experience them every day. How is it different from your experience between that and bipolar disorder?
Yeah, my experience of racing thoughts in mania is there are differences between the racing thoughts of ADHD and bipolar disorder. And I think one of those is pressure. Does your thought pattern seem pressured, a hamster running on a wheel? Or is it having a sense of like a cloud of ideas around your mind and having maybe 3 or 4 or 6 different lines of thought at a time?
So you're saying that with ADHD, there's maybe a bunch of sort of tangential, not necessarily related thoughts, where in bipolar disorder, maybe a stream of racing thoughts that are all about one thing?
Yes.
That's an interesting distinction. One of my follow-ups about, with ADHD, being that we are dopamine seeking, this is what we do. This idea that if something that feels good, if a little feels good, there's this tendency, well, then more must feel better. Right? It's like, for me, it's like, it's the root of when we have all said 1,000+ times, just 5 more minutes, because whatever we're doing is feeling good and transitioning is hard, right? When someone with bipolar disorder and ADHD is in and is able to recognize the start of a manic episode, which feels good.
Yes.
How does someone with ADHD then say, okay, this feels good, but I know that this is going to lead to something that's not good, right? Like that seems like it would be so hard.
It's very difficult. It's also difficult given the emotional dysregulation of bipolar disorder and the emotional dysregulation of ADHD. It's very difficult sometimes to determine how bad is this going to be? Am I feeling these feelings of emotional dysregulation because of the ADHD, or am I going down the path of depression or mania? It's a common experience for people who have particularly bipolar disorder to not necessarily have the insight into, okay, which feelings that I'm having are quote unquote typical or normal, and which feelings am I having that are actually a symptom of one of my diagnoses. I have spent a lot of time in therapy kind of trying to tease this apart. Am I having a particularly good day because it's, sunny out or I've accomplished something? Or is this good day that I'm having a precursor to maybe some really bad times ahead?
It sort of sounds like you can't for a moment even take your eye off that, like checking in with yourself.
Oh, absolutely. And I use an app called Dailyo, which allows you to kind of track your moods. And it's got a great user interface. It's got some good like visual representations of mood, which is really fun. But you basically can set it up so that you can determine, okay, this was my mood overall today. And then here are the things that I've done today. So it'll track like, okay, every good or great day, you have spent time with your friends or brushed your teeth. So it'll be able to show you, okay, here are some of the characteristics of good days, and here are some of the characteristics of bad days. That's a good tool that I'm still trying to use so that I can better manage the emotional dysregulation of ADHD.
Because I know with ADHD, a lot of the sort of the dysregulation and inconsistency has more to do with like what's happening in the environment, that sort of top-down regulation piece, where in bipolar, it's more bottom-up. It's like everything could be good, and yet we're still getting dysregulated.
Right, exactly. And so, yes, bipolar mania is definitely, a function of my brain is not working the way it usually does. Mm. Whereas ADHD, it's like, okay, this is my brain all the time. I've had this negative conversation with a friend, and that's contributing to how I'm feeling right now versus I basically want to crawl into a hole and die.
Mm. I'd be interested to know, and obviously this is just your perspective, like what are some of the things that you have found that people maybe think or assume about ADHD, or about bipolar disorder, similar to like ADHD. It's like, just because you lose your keys doesn't mean you have ADHD. Right? Like what are some of the things about bipolar disorder that just because you have some high energy sometimes, or just because you get sad sometimes, like what are some of those like myths and misinformation that you have come across that you're just like, you just find frustrating?
Yes. So part of what's frustrating is, some of the things that happens on like TikTok and other apps like that, where it's like, oh, I'm so ADHD, or everyone's a little ADHD sometimes. And people do that with like, oh, my bipolar ex-girlfriend, or I'm feeling so bipolar. Oh my God, guys, I'm manic. It's irritating for people to think that they can just pick up some of these characteristics that may describe like a typical part of a life of someone who has a more typical brain. Some of the characteristics of bipolar disorder that people don't understand and may never be able to understand is how non-narrative it is. And so I think that...
What do you mean by that, non-narrative?
Yes. So basically in mania and also in depression, it no longer feels like, okay, X happened and then that led to Y, which led to Z.
Okay.
Instead, there's a disconnection between various points. So a lot of times people don't remember those episodes because they don't fit into a story that you can tell yourself, right?
Mm. And then how is that different from the not remembering because you have ADHD?
Well, a big part of that is like not being able to remember, say, 2 months of your life, like at all.
Okay. And we're not talking about like not remembering like childhood. We're talking about like periods of adulthood.
Yes. Yeah. And like, okay, I've lost all my friends. How did that happen? And trying to piece it together again. It's very different from, oh no, I thought my appointment was at 2 and it was actually at 2:30 or 1:30. And then,
or tomorrow.
I forgot today that I was planning to have dinner with a friend yesterday. And so I made another plan to double booked.
What I want to do is we're going to take one more quick break, and I want to continue exploring the idea of personal narratives around both bipolar and ADHD. So let's take a quick break, and we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our patrons at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. Are the stories you hear on this show the ADHD stories you can relate to? Does this podcast help you understand your ADHD a little better? And would you like to get more from ADHD Rewired? If the answer is yes to any of those, then please consider becoming a patron by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. I want to welcome this week Justin F., Braylon Y., and Kristen E. for joining us this week on Patreon. Be sure to set up your patron-only podcast free to get ad-free episodes. And since each of you became $10 a month contributors, you'll also get the audio recordings on that private podcast feed of our monthly coaching calls. Welcome to the community and thank you for your support. At $5 a month, you can get ad-free episodes of the show. Then at $25 a month, you can join me for our patron-only monthly coaching call every fourth Tuesday of the month. And if you still want to hear the tips and tricks we share in our coaching calls but aren't able to attend every month, then consider becoming a $10 a month patron to get the audio recordings of those monthly coaching calls and get ad-free episodes. You can even save about 8% of whichever monthly contribution you choose when you sign up or switch to our annual plan, which comes out to about getting 1 month free. A huge thank you to our Patreon community for supporting us every month, and thank you to all of our listeners who take the time to tune in every week. If it is in the budget for you now and you find a lot of value in this podcast, consider becoming a patron over at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. If you are a parent or caregiver of kids with executive function challenges, then you won't want to miss TFOS. What is TFOS? TFOS is the Executive Function Online Summit. TFOS 2022 is a unique, free 3-day learning event for proactive and compassionate parents of struggling students. Join 75,000 plus families and teachers worldwide with one of the best ways to prep for back to school. Immerse yourself in game-changing strategies to help your neurodivergent child, taught by 30 leading experts. Get free access August 5th through 7th. 30 leading experts will teach you practical yet unconventional strategies to help kids succeed. ADHD Rewired will also be well represented. Brendan Mahan of ADHD Essentials, MJ Siemens of ADHD Diversified, and I will also be there. TFOS 2022, the Executive Function Online Summit, is August 5th through 7th. Friday through Sunday, you get 10 experts a day. Bonus days are on Monday and Tuesday when you get access to all 30 so you can catch up on any of the sessions you missed. Register now at ADHDrewired.com/TFOS 2022 so they know that I sent you. That's ADHDrewired.com/TFOS 2022. Get free access August 5th through 7th to TFOS, the Executive Function Online Summit. That's ADHDrewired.com/TFOS 2022. The link will be in the show notes. All right, we are back with Kimberly McColl. So let's talk about personal narratives. I think that there's this Brene Brown piece. It's called the Manifesto of the Brave and Brokenhearted. Mm-hmm. And in one of the stanzas, it's the one page. It's on the Google, just Google the Manifesto of the Brave and Brokenhearted. But there's this one line in there that says something like, "Stories are our way home."
Yes. And I think to an extent that's very, very true. And also I love Brene Brown. She's amazing. Her work on shame is really incredible. Mm-hmm. But I think that in some cases that is very true. And so when you experience a part of your life where you can't think about things in terms of story, I think that that's connected to memory. It's hard to remember things that are just flashes of things that happened, right? And not being able to connect those to other parts of what's going on in a day or a week or a month. And given that that's very difficult to put into a story, it's difficult to remember.
So how do you capture those experiences?
Well, some of it is through secondhand or evidence of some of the things that I've done during that period of time. like, oh, I bought this amazing sound system. I don't remember the decision process or how I got to the store.
How does it feel when you like have this moment of like, I have no recollection of like, it's something like buying a big stereo, you know, like, how does that moment feel for you?
The realization.
Yeah.
It feels pretty terrible. One of the things that happens to people pretty frequently when they experience a manic episode is that we, I guess, alienate all our friends, make decisions that basically destroy your life. And so at the end of it, when you look at all the debris around you, it's like, okay, that was really bad. And all those like delusions of grandiosity disappear. And it's like, oh, I did all of this again.
Mm-hmm. Is it almost like a hangover in some ways?
It's like the worst hangover you've ever had.
Or it's like that and the realization of like, sort of makes me think of like college and the walk of shame.
Yes. Yes. Except the walk of shame is your entire life.
Oh no. You know, clearly you have I think a good and healthy attitude about this experience that you live with. You're able to laugh at it, which I think is healthy. I also think that there's a lot of people, if they are even thinking about like, could it be bipolar? Just they get freaked out by that.
Yeah.
What would you tell someone who like, you know, maybe it's bipolar disorder, but they're like, they don't really want to like look at that because if that is what it is, that's a whole new scary reality for them. What would you tell someone like that?
Well, it is scary. And I think it's okay to say, yes, this is a scary thing that you are considering because the life expectancy for ADHD, as we know, is more than 10 years shorter. And the life expectancy with bipolar disorder is even shorter than that. So it is scary to think about, okay, is this something that I'm going to have to deal with my entire life? And the message that I want to send out there for people who are considering this or who are experiencing it is that you can still enjoy a full life if you get that support team around you. So I strongly encourage medication for bipolar disorder and lots of therapy and getting support from any kind of social circle that you can put together.
So let's say a doctor is, you're being assessed and they come back with the diagnosis for bipolar disorder. Is lithium still the sort of drug of choice?
That's the first line medication.
And can you talk a little bit about, do you take lithium?
Oh, no.
No? Okay. Wait, okay. Can I ask what you take?
Yeah, I take Lamictal, which was originally marketed as an anti-seizure medication, but it does an amazing job, for me at least, and for many, many other people, in controlling mood episodes. That's been a huge help for me. I also take Geodone. The generic is Ziprasidone, and that's an antipsychotic. And so that kind of boosts the Lamictal. And then I also take medications for sleep as well as nightmares, which are really helpful too.
I think psychology and psychiatry needs to connect with marketing because the way they name things is just like, come on. Like, because there's a lot of people that I know who take antipsychotic medications and it's not as scary as it sounds, right? So that's, okay. So how has community been a part of your experience of both ADHD as well as bipolar?
So I have found group therapy to be really useful. I think there's something magical in being able to share what you're feeling, but also share your compassion towards other people. That's been very helpful in creating kind of a community for myself.
And has that been for bipolar or for ADHD?
Well, mostly I've been in groups that are trauma-oriented.
Okay.
I would say that pretty much whatever it is that you're experiencing, people are open to hearing like why that might be the case and how you kind of put all that stuff together. And that I think would be another like 2 hours of talking about bipolar disorder, ADHD, and trauma. And then I've been able to foster close relationships with friends. I have maybe 2 or 3 very, very close friends that I know that if I called them at 4:00 in the morning, they would pick up.
And that's from these support groups.
Yes.
I find just the importance and power to use what you said, the magic of group and community really is so important. It was funny. Went to my my son is in 5th grade. He's going to be in middle school next year.
Wow.
And we had the parent orientation for middle school this week, where I live, which is in northern suburb of Chicago, and it's a little bit more of an affluent area. And, I often feel kind of out of place because, it's like everyone's all put together. And I'm just like, where are the people with like the dyed hair and like, the tattoos and, like where are the weirdos? Like, it's funny because it's like community is such an important part of my life. Like, I think that community is something that when we're wired differently, I think it is so essential to have community.
Definitely.
And I just found it so interesting, the juxtaposition between, my communities that I have online and then like my physical community. I'm like, it's a bunch of normies. Like, I don't fit in this group.
Right. It is one of the things that I miss a little bit about academia. I think that sometimes, because that is school related, it may not be immediately clear that is actually kind of a hotbed for ADHD, the kind of the opportunity to hyperfocus on something that you're really passionate about and be able to talk to other people who are also passionate about it. I do miss that in a way. I particularly studied Joyce, and people who study Joyce are often the nutty professor types. And so you can be weird. You can be weird with them.
That's right. I saw probably a decade ago, Stephen Shore, who's an adult with autism, giving a presentation. And one of the things he said, he's like, the university is like sheltered workshops for adults with autism. It's like, because where else can somebody who part of the diagnostic criteria for autism is you tend to talk, obsessively on and on and on and on and monologue about the topics of interest to you. Like, that's the perfect job for somebody with autism, right? It's like, people are showing up to hear you talk about the things that you are obsessively interested in.
Yes, definitely. I went to the North American James Joyce Conference one year, and there's a part of Ulysses, it's one of the end of the chapters, where it's a bunch of like P's and F's. And this professor was making an argument that you can think about that in terms of like pianissimo and fortissimo. So these are
music terms for anyone who's like, what is she talking about?
The loudness and softness of a note. He was making the argument that this was actually the character farting. So he had all of us like making farting noises with our mouth. Hilarious, but also you wouldn't find that, like in your accounting job.
The way that over the last couple of years, sort of integrating the bipolar and ADHD, that has really allowed you to kind of redefine like just how you even view yourself in your life.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's allowed me to have more compassion for myself. Like there's a reason, and that's part of learning the diagnosis that you have. It's not a moral failing. It's not that you're lazy or that you're undisciplined. It's not an issue of like, oh, if you could only use a planner.
Just have you tried a to-do list?
It's like, thanks, I'm cured. I think that being able to recognize in yourself that there are reasons why you're not a normie, and that's okay. Kind of trying to give up that shame around it through talking with other people and sharing experiences.
If someone's listening to this and they're like, oh my God, maybe they're overwhelmed by what they're hearing because they're relating very much to it. In a very concrete way, what would you say would be the first step to help someone sort of explore and kind of figure out, like, is it also bipolar disorder?
First step would be to talk to your care team, whether that is a psychiatrist that you're seeing or maybe a therapist that you also have. Discuss it with them, get an assessment. if this is something that you are struggling with, it's manageable.
And I think that's such an important part of this conversation is all of these things are manageable.
Right. I was just going to say, once you have the diagnosis, then you have access to community. And that's when you can connect with other people. And that's really the purpose of why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I've found that I can be open. And if I am open with other people, that helps not just me, but also them.
Kimberly McColl, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experiences of living with ADHD and bipolar disorder. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really hope this is going to be helpful to hear for listeners. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Eric.
Are there any final thoughts or anything you want to leave listeners with?
Embrace the weirdness.
You heard it here. Embrace the weirdness. I love it. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired podcast network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson. The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer. The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown. The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey. Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Baden. The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great, starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and The Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired. Click the button to be a guest at the top of the page and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.